interests?
Well, I think they probably are finally saying that we've got to be rid of this guy because it's just going to be one up and down going on forever. It's been going on for the better part of 42 years, and we can't do any planning or investing on that sort of basis. So I think finally they're getting the message.
Right, but again, the alarm bells will ring, you see. Again, with US intervention, oil companies saying it's time to get rid of him, it's the same scenario. I mean, that's why people are so wary of US intervention. It looks like another scramble for Middle East oil or North African oil.
Well, it's so that suggests that you have to do it wisely, and I think you lead with humanitarian assistance. That's something else in addition to the command and control disruption. We can share intelligence with the forces, but all of those things require a government in place in the liberated Libya, and there has to be a chain of command, a military chain of command that's recognized that you can share intelligence with. So all of that has to take place. This is the challenge. The same way to provide humanitarian aid, we can get into Benghazi and Derna and Tobruk and provide the humanitarian aid, but there's always a risk, and usually somebody wants to put boots on the ground to defend the delivery of the aid in the event of. So all of this will take time and a government that's firmly in place.
Henry Schuler. To other news now, the US Army has filed 22 extra charges against the soldier suspected of passing on government documents to WikiLeaks. The additional charges against Bradley Manning include one of what the Army calls aiding the enemy. He could face the death penalty for that offence, although prosecutors insist they will instead seek a life sentence. Manning was notified in person about the additional charges on Wednesday. He's being held at a Marine Corps base in the US state of Virginia. A vast quantity of official military and diplomatic documents have been published by WikiLeaks. The US diplomatic cables were revealing about Washington's view of an array of countries and leaders. But WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who the US government is investigating for possible criminal charges, claims not to know the source of the information. The information includes more than 600,000 documents and a video that showed a 2007 helicopter attack on civilians in Baghdad. Concerned about the fallout from the cables, the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the released documents, quote, tear at the fabric of government. However, in November, the Defense Secretary, Robert Gates, expressed the view that the consequences for foreign policy are, quote, fairly modest. We're joined by Professor John Shelburne of the Roger Williams School of Law. He's Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Marine Corps Reserve and is certified as a military judge. He's been advising an advocacy group for Manning and joins us live from Providence in the US state of Rhode Island. Thank you very much for joining us. Why do you feel the authorities needed to file 22 extra charges against Manning?
Sir, I think the additional charges are really just a reflection of the prosecutors now having had a better opportunity to review their case, and at this point, they bring the additional charges merely to bring a little more pressure on the defense, to encourage them to either try to make a plea agreement or in some ways it better refines what the prosecution is trying to do when they go to the Article 32 hearing, whenever that actually gets held.
But should we take this as a suggestion that the previous accusations may not be as strong as the prosecution had wanted, and perhaps the prosecution wants a settlement and not a full tribunal?
I don't know about the strength of the earlier charges, but one of the, I think, positions that any prosecution takes is before they actually bring the charge to a hearing to review the strength of those charges, they have the ability and the leeway to revise and change those charges up until the point where they're formally charged.
What will the prosecution have to prove to convict Manning of aiding the enemy?
I think the biggest change with that new charge under Article 104 is the need to be able to show either direct or indirect aid to the enemy, and to me that seems to be the biggest hurdle any prosecutor will have to face, to be able to actually show that link.
Right, especially since the Defense Secretary said there's little evidence that the enemy has been aided. In fact, we've had a Pentagon spokesman say there's no evidence of reprisals against any Afghan informers.
Well, you are obviously very well aware that when things are aired publicly, what happens in a prosecution, the actual evidence that is shown at a court-martial or at a trial, obviously and quite often is very different than what has been aired publicly.
There's been no mention of WikiLeaks. In fact, is it clear when there's a reference to the enemy whether the enemy is WikiLeaks or the Taliban?
Well, that's actually a very good question. I think how they define the enemy is one of the other questions that comes up immediately is, from a prosecution standpoint and clearly from the defense perspective, how are you going to define the charge and actually prove the charge? So who is that enemy?
And you are advising this advocacy group. What are you suggesting should be the case for the defense?
Let me be clear. I'm not advising anyone. I'm merely helping to basically help the media understand and the public understand what the nature of these charges are and essentially what happens under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. All
right. So, okay, well, I'm glad we're cleared that up. But would this have any impact on the Nuremberg principles that a soldier should refuse to obey laws, any order that may be against international law?
I think it'll be interesting to see if motions are filed in that regard. I'm not sure if this case is going to be the one that has the direct impact on that, but that certainly gets asked with any court-martial that has the overtones or undertones of anything that might involve the law of armed conflict. And we always have an obligation to follow the direct orders of our superiors unless they are a clear violation of the law. So I can anticipate that the defense may bring some motion to that effect.
Professor, thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.
And that's all for the moment from Washington. Now let's return to Doha.
Two U.S. servicemen have been shot dead as their military coach arrived at Germany's Frankfurt airport. German authorities have arrested a 21-year-old Kosovan. Two other Air Force personnel were injured. Sylvia Lennon reports.
The attack took place inside a bus at one of Europe's busiest airports. A lone gunman got inside the vehicle carrying U.S. military personnel. Then he shot at several passengers just as it pulled into the terminal. One soldier and the bus driver were killed.
I would like to express how upset I am. The German government will do everything to find out what happened. I would like to express my condolences to the American soldiers and their families and relatives. It's a terrible tragedy.
Police have arrested one suspect. In a surprise appearance in the White House briefing room, the U.S. President Barack Obama was quick to respond, saying he's saddened and outraged by the attack.
We will spare no effort in learning how this outrageous act took place and in working with German authorities to ensure that all of the perpetrators are brought to justice.
The German regional interior minister says the man being blamed for the attack is from Kosovo, but doesn't specify if he was a soldier or what the motivation could be.
We're
investigating all possibilities. Whether there is a terrorist background, a jihadist background or an Islamic background, I cannot say at all right now. Our investigations will reveal that, as well as what the perpetrator's motives were.
The US military has a number of major bases near Frankfurt, which are used as hubs for operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Police have now sealed off the crime scene and security at the airport has been increased. Sylvia Lennon, Al Jazeera.